Hello, new friends. Welcome to this quiet ramble video where I'll talk about the Coptic Church a little bit and my visit to Egypt, and we'll use some lovely brushes for some visual relaxation. So, Egypt is an absolutely extraordinary country. It's fascinating. One way to try to put it in perspective a little bit, I think, is from the biographer and historian and Professor Philip Freeman in his biography of Alexander the Great. And he pointed out how when Alexander got to Egypt and saw the pyramids and the Sphinx, they were as old to him as he is to us now. So it puts into perspective just how far back the history of that country goes. So the Coptic Church in Egypt is two things in a way. There's the official Coptic Church, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And these are, I bought these from Coptic Christians in a store that they have to help raise money for the church and to help the persecuted Copts. But so there's that church, and then also, from what I could tell, that's sort of a term applied to any Christians in Egypt. They're called Coptic. And I think part of that might be because Coptic comes from the Greek word Egyptos, which means Egyptian. To give a little bit of background, within the Catholic Church, there are generally considered to be 7 rites. And I'm doing this very oversimplified for the purpose of this particular video. But you can dig deeper and find a lot more details and nuances and sometimes kind of different names. But I think for our visit today in our chat, just very general terms will work. So, there's the Latin Rite, which most people are familiar with. That would be the Roman Catholic Church. But also within full communion of the Roman or Latin Rite, there are 6 Eastern rites. Now, these different rites developed because when the apostles and disciples of Jesus went out spreading the news of the Lord's death and resurrection and this new religion, Christianity, they went to different parts of the world. They went all over, though really kind of in that Mediterranean, Middle East area. And so naturally different types of churches sprung up based on the traditions and the norms of that particular area, taking into account traditions and maybe where those people, started from in their faith. And the Coptic Church started in Alexandria in about 43 AD, and it was founded by St. Mark, who you might know from the Gospel of Mark. Other rites include the Byzantine Rite, which was up by Constantinople, the Chaldean Rite in Iraq, there's the Maronite, which I believe was Lebanon, and then ones like the Syriac, the Armenian, and the Alexandrian Rite. So the Coptic Church is under the Alexandrian Rite. And while there are some differences, obviously, in all of these, the basic doctrine of Christ being full person and full man, and of the Eucharist and all that are the same in all the churches. So they're all just as much Catholic as the Roman Catholic Church, which, if you live in the US, or if you live in Europe, or if you have TV and have ever heard of the Pope, might be the one you're most familiar with, because he celebrates primarily the Latin Rite, and of course Vatican City is essentially in Rome. So with that history behind us, we could talk a little bit about the church today, the Coptic Church. Oh, goodness, there's still a price tag on here. Excuse me, I'm going to peel this off real quick. You know what? Looks like I'm not going to. There's a reason that's still on there. So the Coptic Church in Egypt has been persecuted for a long, long time, essentially since it existed. And it comes in waves, as persecutions generally do. So about a decade ago, there had been a new widespread persecution, and many, many, many were killed. Islamic extremists are responsible for a big part of that. Certainly Coptics kind of have their own area where they hang out for safety, and I think maybe unofficially that's where they're supposed to be and stay. And so, in what I'll call modern times, I guess, or, quite recently, this millennium, while there is some persecution by the Egyptian government itself, what I've seen is that it's not quite active, where soldiers are going out sort of regularly attacking them, or police officers, but it's more that they don't stop anybody else who does. Like, there aren't many consequences for the burning of the Coptic churches, or the attacks, or those many, many, many killings that happened not that long ago. And of course, you're somewhat discriminated in society with jobs or positions you can hold and things like that. So that's part of it. And then when you're in Egypt, of course, the military is just very, very active. It's just different, right? And especially when all the turbulence was going on, when they were the rioting and the stuff with Mubarak, and then Morsi, and of course El-Sisi was running, and his propaganda was everywhere. And some of the riots, I think the biggest ones that we think of, they weren't in big open spaces, the ones you might have seen on TV. And so when you're in those places, when that's happening, you're right kind of in the heart of things. So the big building that got burned, that got a lot of play in media, it's right by the very famous history museum in Cairo. In fact, if you sit on one of the little stone walls in the museum gardens, that building's basically right behind you. And I will say again, if you want to talk about history, there's just so much history in Egypt for so many years that the museum basically just doesn't have room. I mean, it's so full, and it's like they've just set stuff around. It's really interesting. Also, with the military everywhere, like you just walk down the streets and there'll be a machine gun and they'll just follow you with it as you walk. And it's everywhere, and when you drive. And yet, it's not frightening, or at least it wasn't for me. Part of it is I have friends, so maybe that helped a bit. But, and my friends are Egyptian. But, I have friends who've been in jail, and they're Islamic Egyptian, just to be clear. I don't have any friends who are Coptic. And things like that. So it is a real threat. But like almost anywhere in the world, life just goes on and people are the same, and I don't know, you have drinks and food in open air markets. It's fun. One of the neatest experiences I had there, well, I mean, obviously the coolest thing maybe ever, was seeing the pyramid and the Sphinx. Riding out on horseback and being out there and knowing how old they were and what it represented and how many people had seen them. It was remarkable. I don't know if this happens to anybody else, but sometimes when I go see something famous, I feel a sense of anticlimax because I've seen it so many times before in a movie or, recreated somewhere, maybe Epcot, or especially with art. If you go see a very famous piece of artwork, but you've already seen it reproduced so many times that you're like, oh, yep, looks just like all the posters. But I certainly didn't feel that with the pyramids. It was awe, and I could not go out to them often enough. Maybe partly because I like riding horses too. But it was amazing. It really was. But the other cool thing I was going to talk about, specifically, there are many cool things, was I was in one of the mosques, and another friend of mine had, done my hijab. I hope I got that right. For me, and I'm in there, and Iran and Egypt are working to build some relationships, and so an Iranian security delegation was at this mosque accompanying something important to Egyptians to the country, and there were a lot of people there to see it. And, there's a lot of tensions, obviously, between the US and Iran. And so I asked, and keep in mind, please, I don't speak any dialect of Arabic, and they didn't really speak English, but if I could get a picture. And so I'm in this mosque in Cairo, and I'm sitting between two Iranian security, I don't know what they call their security forces, but these guys, who don't look happy in the picture, don't get me wrong, but they let me take it, and me in my little outfit so that I would be allowed to go to the mosque. And there we are, we're all just sitting there, everybody just as nice as could be, if not as cheerful as could be. And that's one of the memories I think is really cool. And then, of course, going down the Nile and thinking about the history and what that's meant to the world, especially to Western civilization. Can you hear that? I like that sound. Despite all the guns being pointed at me, or being watched everywhere, I never felt frightened, though I did have one moment of uh-oh when I was leaving, actually. Oh, real quick, before I do that, just to sort of explain some differences. So, as I find often happens when you go to, when you go on foreign travel, it's very common to lose your bag, is what I found. Especially, certain countries are kind of more prone to it than others. So, we had to go back to the airport to pick up my bag a couple days after I arrived. And we're waiting, and there's these two guys, the security at the airport, just horseplaying with a pistol, just throwing it up and down and doing it. And one of my friends, he was in the Egyptian Air Force, and he's trained in the US, so he has a lot of experience with a lot of cultures. He was just aghast, and we were just sitting there and debating if we should get behind something just in case that gun went off. It wasn't scary, but it was just odd. And then, of course, you can't rely on electricity or water. If you live in the United States or in most parts of Europe, you can generally rely on your lights to always come on, or your water to always come out of the tap and be clean. There are exceptions, but the exceptions are just that. But there you just knew sometimes the lights would work, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes there'd be clean water, sometimes there wouldn't. And you just kind of deal with it and roll with it. Oops, sorry. Oh, so I was talking about that one kind of scary thing that happened. So, I go to the airport to go home, and as one does, I show my passport, and the guy takes it, and looks at it, and looks at me, and and walks away. I don't know where he goes. I can't see him anymore. And I was just thinking, what do I do? If he went back there and destroys my passport, what will happen? I mean, I can ask to talk to the embassy and all, but it was a very weird feeling. And then, I don't know, it felt like a while. I don't know how long it really was. He came back and gave it to me and let me through, but I don't know what they did with that passport. I don't know what was happening, and I couldn't even really ask because he didn't speak English, and as I said, I don't speak any Arabic. I don't know if we had any other languages in common, but I doubt it. And I don't think I'm probably really proficient enough in any of them to understand the intricacies of Egyptian security politics, so probably wouldn't matter. But it all worked out. Anyhow, when you're thinking of the church, please keep in mind our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted in many places or are trying to stay faithful among difficulties. And if you're interested in, different forms of liturgy, you might want to look up some of the other rites, especially if you find art or beauty or what would I say, ornate kind of things, very very moving, or that they help you focus in prayer. The Eastern rites have some really beautiful things. They use a lot of icons in their liturgy in churches. And of course the Latin rite, we have a lot of beautiful, beautiful things as well, but the Eastern rites naturally have their own style, their own look. But you might enjoy it or find something that suits you. So I thank you very much for being with me here today. One I always love when you come to visit. But this was really fun for me to talk about these things. Oh, this is the symbol of the Coptic Church. I never mentioned that before. This is, or not Coptic, the Eastern rites tend to use this style of cross. More than the crucifix that we use in our Latin rite that you'll see. And then there's a Jerusalem cross too. A lot of symbols to choose from. I don't think these candlesticks have any particular meaning. I just liked them. Like the color, the blue and the green. I've never actually used them. They just sit out. They're kind of shallow to use. I don't know how tall of a candlestick you could put in here. Candlestick? Candle? Taper? Candle? Yeah. Well, how tall of one you could put in here. Anyway, I do love it very much when you come to visit. And it was very lovely of you to let me reminisce about some nice things and to talk with me and hopefully pray as we chatted for anyone being persecuted for their religion or persecuted at all. And I hope you have a little bit of admiration, as I do, for people who stay strong. And of course, we can also pray for the persecutors, right? So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.